"Dad, if you marry her, you will lose me." Those were the words my daughter said to me just 3 days before I planned to ask the woman I loved to become my wife. I had spent 24 years believing I understood my daughter better than anyone in the world. I had been there for every birthday, every school event, every difficult moment, and every quiet night when she needed someone to remind her that she was never alone. But standing in my kitchen that evening, looking at the person I had sacrificed everything for, I realized there was a part of her heart I no longer understood. My name is Michael Bennett, and for most of my adult life, my world revolved around one person, my daughter Emily. When she was just a little girl, life changed in ways I never expected. I became a single father, and from that moment forward, every decision I made was about giving Emily the best life I could. I never saw those years as a burden. I never counted the things I missed. I never looked at the dreams I put aside as sacrifices. To me, being her father was the greatest responsibility and the greatest privilege I had ever known. I learned how to make breakfast before sunrise. I learned how to help with school projects I barely understood. I learned how to comfort a child who was afraid of the world and remind her that she would always have someone standing beside her. There were nights when I was exhausted after work, but Emily still wanted to tell me about her day. I listened because those moments mattered. There were weekends when other people were building their own lives, but I was sitting in a school auditorium or watching her learn something new. I never regretted it. Watching her grow was worth every difficult day. As the years passed, Emily became an incredible young woman. She was kind, intelligent, and independent. I was proud of the person she became. But somewhere deep inside, I think I always worried about one thing. I wondered what would happen when she no longer needed me the way she did when she was younger. I never admitted that fear because a father is supposed to encourage his child to build their own life. I wanted Emily to be happy, even if that meant she eventually walked a path far away from mine. Then Sarah entered my life. Meeting Sarah was something I never expected at my age. I had spent so many years thinking about my responsibilities that I had forgotten what it felt like to simply enjoy someone's company. Sarah was patient, thoughtful, and respectful of the relationship Emily and I shared. She never tried to replace anyone. She never asked me to choose between my past and my future. She simply wanted to be part of my life. For the first time in decades, I allowed myself to imagine a future that was not only about being a father. I allowed myself to think about companionship, laughter, and having someone beside me as I grew older. I thought Emily would understand. I thought she would see that her father was not abandoning her. I thought she would be happy that I had found someone who brought peace into my life. But when I finally told her about my plans, her reaction was not what I expected. She looked at me with tears in her eyes and said the sentence that would change everything. "Dad, if you marry her, you will lose me." I stood there silently, trying to understand how the daughter I had spent 24 years protecting could believe that loving someone else meant loving her less. I wanted to ask why. I wanted to know what Sarah had done. I wanted to understand what fear was hiding behind those words. But before I could say anything, Emily walked away. And for the first time in 24 years, I wondered if the person I had always fought to protect was the person I needed to understand the most. After Emily walked away that evening, I stayed in the kitchen for a long time, staring at the chair where she had been sitting. I kept replaying her words in my mind, trying to understand what she truly meant. I had expected questions. I had expected concerns. I even expected that she might need time to adjust to the idea of me starting a new chapter in my life. But I never expected her to believe that my happiness would mean losing our relationship. The next morning, I woke up earlier than usual. For 24 years, my mornings had followed the same routine. I would think about Emily first. Was she doing well? Did she need anything? Was there something I could do to make her life easier? Even after she became an adult, those thoughts never completely disappeared. A parent never really stops caring. The difference was that now I had to learn how to care without holding on too tightly. I made coffee and sat quietly at the kitchen table, looking at old photographs stored on my phone. There were pictures of Emily as a little girl, wearing a backpack bigger than she was. There were pictures from school events, family celebrations, and simple afternoons that meant everything to me. Looking at those memories reminded me of the promise I made to myself when I became a single father. I promised Emily that she would always know she was loved. I promised I would be there whenever she needed me. But I never promised that I would stop living my own life forever. That was the part one struggled with. For years, I had defined myself only as a father. I had forgotten that before I was a father, I was also a person with hopes, dreams, and a desire for companionship. When Sarah came into my life, she did not ask me to change who I was. She appreciated the person I had become because of my experiences. She understood that Emily would always be an important part of my life. In fact, one of the things I admired about Sarah was how much respect she showed toward my relationship with my daughter. She often told me, "Michael, a good person does not make you choose between the people you love." Those words stayed with me, because deep down, I wondered if Emily believed she had to make me choose. A few days after our conversation, I decided to visit Emily. I did not go there to convince her. I did not go there to announce my decision. I simply wanted to understand. When she opened the door, I immediately noticed that she looked tired. The confidence she usually carried was replaced by uncertainty. "Dad, I know you are upset," she said. I shook my head. "I am not upset. I am trying to understand." We sat in her living room, and for a while, neither of us spoke. Finally, Emily looked at me and said something I did not expect. "I am scared." That was not the answer I had prepared myself for. I had expected anger. I had expected resistance. But fear was different. "Scared of what?" I asked. Emily looked down at her hands. "I am scared that after everything we went through, I will not matter anymore." Hearing those words changed something inside me. Because suddenly, I realized this was not only about Sarah. It was about a little girl who had grown up believing that her father was the one person who would always stay. Even though Emily was now an adult, part of her still remembered the years when it was just the two of us against the world. I reached for her hand. "Emily, you will always matter. Nothing about that will ever change." She looked at me with tears in her eyes. "But what if things change after you get married?" I thought carefully before answering. Things will change. Life always changes. But change does not mean losing someone. She was quiet. I knew my words did not solve everything immediately. 24 years of emotions could not disappear in one conversation. But for the first time, I felt like we were finally talking about the real problem. It was not Sarah. It was not the wedding. It was the fear that love could be divided. And I knew I had to show Emily that the love between a father and daughter was not something another person could take away. After my conversation with Emily, I drove home with more questions than answers. But for the first time since she spoke those painful words, I did not feel like I was fighting against my daughter. I felt like I was finally beginning to understand her. Emily was not trying to take happiness away from me. She was afraid of losing the only family she had ever known. That realization changed the way I looked at everything. For 24 years, I had always been the person protecting Emily. I had been the one making sure she felt safe, supported, and loved. But I never considered that one day she might feel like she needed to protect me too. The next few days gave me time to think about the journey we had shared. I remembered the years when Emily was young and the two of us were building a life together. We had our own little traditions. Every Friday night, we would order pizza and watch a movie. Every holiday, we created our own special routines. When she was nervous about starting school, I reminded her that she was stronger than she believed. When she faced challenges as a teenager, I tried to give advice while also giving her space to become her own person. Those moments shaped both of us. Emily grew up knowing she could depend on me. But perhaps that was exactly why this change felt so difficult for her. In her mind, the idea of me marrying Sarah was not just about a new relationship. It represented a change to the world she had known her entire life. I decided it was time for Emily and Sarah to meet in a different way. They had seen each other before, but most of their conversations happened during moments filled with tension. I wanted them to have a chance to talk without fear or assumptions. I invited them both to dinner at my home. Before Sarah arrived, Emily looked nervous. "Dad, I do not know if this is a good idea," she said. I smiled gently. Sometimes the conversations we avoid are the ones we need the most. When Sarah arrived, she immediately noticed the tension in the room. She did not try to force anything. She simply sat down and treated Emily with kindness and respect. That was one of the things I appreciated about Sarah. She understood that my daughter was not an obstacle. She was part of my life. During dinner, the conversation started slowly. At first, we talked about simple things. Work, hobbies, everyday life. But eventually, the subject came up naturally. Emily looked at Sarah and asked, "Do you really understand what my relationship with my dad means?" Sarah did not hesitate. "Yes, I do," she answered. "And that is one of the reasons I respect him so much." Emily seemed surprised. Sarah continued. A person who can spend 24 years putting someone else first is someone I admire. I would never want to take that away from you. I watched Emily carefully. I could see that those words reached her in a way my explanations could not. Because sometimes people need to hear reassurance from someone outside the situation. After dinner, Emily and I sat together on the porch. The evening was quiet, and for a moment, everything felt like it did years ago. I think I was afraid of becoming less important, Emily admitted. I looked at her and said, "You are my daughter. That place in my life cannot be replaced." She nodded slowly. "I know that now. I just did not know how to handle the idea of sharing you." Her honesty meant more to me than immediate approval. It showed me that beneath the fear was still the same daughter I had raised. A daughter who loved me deeply but was struggling with change. As the weeks passed, I noticed something beginning to shift. Emily was not completely comfortable yet, and I understood that healing takes time. But she started asking questions about Sarah instead of avoiding the subject. She started seeing that Sarah was not trying to create a new family without her. She was trying to become part of the family we already had. Still, there was one thing I could not ignore. Emily had reacted so strongly for a reason. There was something behind her fear that she had not fully explained. And before I could move forward with my future, I needed to understand the truth she was still keeping to herself. After the dinner where Emily and Sarah finally had a chance to speak honestly, I thought things would become easier. I believed that seeing their conversation unfold would help me understand what was happening between them. And in some ways, it did. I saw that Emily was not trying to stop my happiness. I saw that Sarah was not trying to replace the relationship I had with my daughter. But I also realized that there was still a piece of the story I did not know. Emily was carrying a fear that went deeper than simply accepting a new person in my life. A few days later, I asked Emily if she would meet me for coffee. I chose a small cafe near her apartment, the same kind of place where we used to spend time together when she was younger. I wanted her to feel that this conversation was not about choosing sides. It was about understanding each other. When she arrived, she smiled, but I could tell she was thinking about something. We talked for a while about ordinary things. Her work, her plans, the little details of life that parents never stop wanting to know about their children. Then I finally asked the question that had been on my mind. "Emily, I know you are worried about losing me, but I need to understand where that fear comes from." She looked down at her coffee cup and took a deep breath. For a moment, I thought she might avoid answering. Then she finally spoke. "Dad, when Mom left, you were the only person who stayed." Her words immediately took me back years. Emily was only a child when our family changed. She had memories of uncertainty that I knew about, but I never realized how deeply they stayed with her. "I watched you work so hard," she continued. "You gave up so much for me. You never complained. You never made me feel like I was missing anything. But I always knew you were alone." I listened quietly. "When Sarah came into your life, part of me was happy for you. I really was. But another part of me was afraid." "Afraid of what?" I asked. Emily looked at me with tears in her eyes. "Afraid that after everything you gave up for me, you would finally choose someone else and forget the life we built together." Hearing that was difficult, not because I was angry, but because I realized how much pain she had been carrying silently. Emily was not afraid of Sarah. She was afraid of losing the person who had always made her feel safe. I reached across the table and held her hand. "Emily, I need you to understand something. I did not spend 24 years raising you so that you would feel responsible for my happiness. I did it because I loved you." She nodded slowly. "I know that now." I continued, "But loving you does not mean I have to stop living. And loving Sarah does not mean I love you any less." For the first time, I saw Emily begin to accept that idea. She was not losing her father. She was simply watching him become a person beyond the role he had carried for so many years. Later that evening, I spoke with Sarah about the conversation. She listened carefully and smiled. "Michael, she loves you. That is what I see." I nodded. "I know. I just wish she understood that she does not have to protect me from happiness." Sarah looked at me and said, something I would remember. "Sometimes the people who love us the most are the ones who have the hardest time accepting change." Those words helped me see the situation differently. This was not a battle between a daughter and a future wife. It was a moment where everyone involved had to learn how love changes as life moves forward. Over the next few weeks, Emily slowly began opening up more. She started asking Sarah about her life instead of only seeing her as someone entering our family. She started joining us for simple dinners and conversations. Nothing changed overnight. Trust and comfort take time. But the walls that once stood between us were slowly coming down. Still, I knew there was one final challenge ahead. Emily had accepted that I could love someone else, but she still had one concern she had not shared with me. And when I finally learned what it was, I understood why she had been so afraid from the very beginning. I thought the hardest part of my journey with Emily would be helping her accept Sarah. But I soon realized that the real challenge was helping both of us understand how much our past shaped the way we saw the future. Emily had spent 24 years believing that I was the person who would always be there no matter what happened. And she was right. I had always been there. But she had started believing that my devotion to her meant I could never have a life beyond being her father. That was the misunderstanding we needed to overcome. A few days after our conversation at the coffee shop, Emily called me and asked if we could talk. Her voice sounded different, less defensive, more thoughtful. When I arrived at her apartment, I noticed a small box sitting on the table. I recognized it immediately. It was the same box where she kept old memories from her childhood. Photographs, birthday cards, and little reminders of the years we spent together. I found something while I was looking through these, Emily said. She opened the box and pulled out an old photograph. It was a picture of the two of us when she was about 5 years old. We were standing in front of our first home, both of us smiling. I remembered that day clearly. That house was not perfect. The paint needed work. The yard was small. But to us, it represented a new beginning. I used to think this picture showed how much you gave up for me, Emily said. But now I realize it shows how much you loved me. Her words meant more than she probably understood, because that was all I ever wanted her to know. Every choice I made during those years came from love, not obligation. Emily, you were never a sacrifice, I told her. You were the best part of my life. She smiled, but I could tell she still had something on her mind. After a moment, she looked at me and said, "There is something else I need to tell you." I waited. When I first met Sarah, I did not dislike her because of who she was. I was afraid because of what she represented. I listened carefully. She represented change, and change has always scared me. That confession helped me understand something important. Sometimes people are not afraid of a person. They are afraid of what that person means. Sarah represented a new chapter in my life. To Emily, that new chapter felt like the end of the one we shared. But she had not realized that families do not work that way. A new chapter does not erase the previous ones. It becomes part of the same story. I told Emily about the first time Sarah and I talked about her. I explained that Sarah always respected the relationship between us. She never wanted me to spend less time with my daughter. She never wanted to replace the family we had created. She wanted to add to it. I think I understand that now, Emily said quietly. I was so focused on losing something that I never considered I could gain something too. That sentence stayed with me, because it showed that Emily was changing. She was beginning to see the situation from a different perspective. Later that week, Emily invited Sarah and me to dinner at her place. It was a small gesture, but I knew how meaningful it was. For weeks, Emily had viewed Sarah as someone who might take away her father. Now she was making space for Sarah in her life. During dinner, the conversation felt natural. There were no uncomfortable pauses, no hidden tension, just three people trying to understand each other. At one point, Emily looked at Sarah and said, "I know my dad means everything to me, but I am starting to understand that he deserves happiness too." Sarah smiled and replied, "And I know how much your dad loves you. That is one of the reasons I care about him." Hearing those words brought a sense of peace I had not felt in a long time. But I also knew healing was not finished yet. Emily had taken an important step, but there was still something unresolved between us. She had accepted Sarah, but she still carried guilt about how she had spoken to me. And I knew she needed to understand one final thing. A daughter does not lose her father when he finds love again. Sometimes, she gains a bigger family than she ever imagined. I used to think that being a good father meant always knowing what my child needed before they said a word. For 24 years, I had watched Emily grow, and I had learned every expression on her face, every change in her voice, and every moment when she needed support. But I discovered something important during this journey. Even after raising someone for an entire lifetime, there are still parts of their heart that they may struggle to share. Emily had spent years carrying a fear she never fully explained to me, and I had spent years believing my love alone was enough to make her feel secure. We were both wrong in our own ways. A few weeks after the dinner where Emily and Sarah finally began building a connection, I noticed a change in my daughter. She was not suddenly comfortable with everything. She still had questions. She still needed time. But she was no longer looking at Sarah as someone who was taking her place. Instead, she was beginning to see her as someone who could become part of our lives. One evening, Emily came over to my house and asked if we could talk. The moment she sat down, I could tell this conversation was different. She was not trying to defend her choices. She was trying to explain them. "Dad, there is something I should have told you from the beginning," she said. I waited quietly. "When you told me about Sarah, I was not just worried about losing you. I was worried because I remembered what happened before. I knew she was talking about the years when our family changed. The years when I became the only parent she could rely on. When Mom left, you became everything for me," Emily continued. "You were my father, my support system, and the person who made me feel safe. I think part of me became afraid that if you found someone else, I would lose the one person who never left." Hearing that was difficult because I realized Emily had been carrying a memory, not just a fear. She was not reacting only to Sarah. She was reacting to a younger version of herself who once felt uncertain about whether people would stay. I reached over and held her hand. "Emily, I wish you had told me this sooner." She nodded. "I know. I should have. But I did not want to sound selfish." That word caught my attention. Selfish. Emily believed that admitting her fear would make her a bad daughter. But fear does not make someone selfish. Sometimes fear simply means someone cares deeply and does not know how to handle change. "Emily, wanting your father to stay close does not make you selfish," I said. "But believing I cannot love anyone else because of that fear would not be fair to either of us." She looked at me and nodded slowly. I could see she was understanding something she had not considered before. A child and a parent have a special bond, but that bond is not meant to prevent either person from growing. As parents, we raise our children so they can build their own lives. But sometimes we forget that we also have to continue building ours. Later that week, Sarah and I talked about the conversation. She listened carefully and told me something I had started to understand more clearly. "Michael, Emily is not trying to stop you from being happy. She is trying to make sure she still belongs." Those words stayed with me, because belonging is something every person wants. Children want to know they still matter. Partners want to know they are valued. Families want to know they can change without breaking apart. The following weekend, Emily surprised me by asking if Sarah wanted to join us for lunch. It was a simple invitation, but I knew how meaningful it was. It showed that Emily was making room for a new reality. During lunch, we talked about ordinary things. Work, travel plans, family memories. There was laughter. There were no arguments. It felt like the beginning of something new. On the drive home, Sarah smiled and said, "Your daughter is stronger than she realizes." I smiled too. She gets that from somewhere. But even as things improved, I knew one important conversation was still ahead. Emily had started accepting Sarah, but she had not yet forgiven herself for the words she had spoken to me. She still believed she had almost damaged our relationship. And I knew I needed to help her understand that love between a father and daughter is not broken by one difficult moment. Sometimes, those difficult moments are exactly what help people understand each other better. After everything that happened, I started to realize that the hardest part of being a parent is not raising a child. It is learning when to step back and allow that child to become an adult. For 24 years, my entire identity had been connected to being Emily's father. I was the person she called when she needed advice. I was the person she trusted when life felt uncertain. I was the person who stayed when everything else changed. But now I was learning that love does not mean holding someone in the same place forever. Sometimes love means giving them the space to grow while continuing to stand beside them. A few weeks before my wedding, Emily asked if we could spend the afternoon together. We went to one of our favorite places, a quiet park where I used to take her when she was a child. As we walked along the path, I noticed how much had changed. The little girl who once held my hand while learning to ride a bicycle was now a grown woman walking beside me, trying to understand a new chapter of our relationship. "Dad, I owe you an apology," Emily said suddenly. I looked at her and waited. "For what?" I asked. She stopped walking and looked toward the trees. "For making you feel like you had to choose between me and your happiness." Her words surprised me because I had never wanted her to carry that guilt. "Emily, you were scared. I understand that." She shook her head. "I know, but I also know I hurt you." When I said those things, I was only thinking about what I was afraid of. I did not think about how it would make you feel after everything you have done for me. I placed my hand on her shoulder. You are my daughter. You never have to earn your place in my life. She smiled through her tears. I think I spent so much time being afraid of losing you that I forgot you were not trying to leave me. That sentence stayed with me because it captured everything we had been struggling with. Emily was not losing her father. She was watching her father continue living. There is a difference. I told her something I had been thinking about for a long time. Emily, when you were little, my job was to protect you. But now that you are grown, my job is different. My job is to support you while you build your own life. She nodded. And my job is to support you too, right? I smiled. Exactly. That was the moment I felt something change between us. Not because every fear disappeared instantly. Not because everything became perfect overnight. But because we finally understood that our relationship could change without becoming weaker. Later that week, Emily spent more time with Sarah. I noticed small things that showed she was becoming more comfortable. She asked Sarah about her childhood. She shared stories about mine. She laughed when Sarah told her embarrassing stories about me that I had hoped nobody would ever hear. Watching them together gave me a feeling I had not expected. Relief. For months, I worried that the two most important women in my life would never understand each other. But I realized they did not need to become the same kind of relationship. Emily was my daughter. Sarah was the woman I loved. They each had a different place in my heart. And there was enough room for both. The night before the wedding, Emily came to my house. She handed me a small envelope. Inside was a letter she had written. She told me how grateful she was for the years I spent raising her. She told me she was proud of the father I had been. But the sentence that meant the most was the last one. She wrote, I do not want to be the reason you stop living. I want to be the reason you know how much love you have already created. I had to take a moment before answering, because those words meant everything. The daughter I had spent 24 years protecting was finally telling me that it was okay to protect my own happiness too. The next morning, as I prepared for the wedding, I thought about everything that brought us there. The fear, the misunderstanding, the difficult conversations. None of it was easy. But sometimes the hardest moments reveal the strongest bonds. I was not losing my daughter. I was gaining a new understanding of the relationship we shared. And as I looked toward the future, I knew one thing for certain. A family does not become smaller when love grows. It becomes bigger. The morning of my wedding was not the morning I once imagined. Years earlier, I never thought I would be standing in front of a mirror at my age, preparing for a new beginning. I thought my story was already written. I believed my greatest purpose had been raising Emily, and once she became an adult, I would simply continue living quietly, carrying the memories of the years we shared. But life has a way of reminding us that new chapters can begin at any age. As I looked at myself that morning, I thought about everything that brought me to that moment. 24 years of being a single father. 24 years of putting someone else's needs before my own. 24 years of learning that love was not just about big moments, but about thousands of small choices made every day. I thought about the little girl who once needed me for everything and the woman she had become. Most importantly, I thought about the conversation that almost changed everything. If Emily had not opened her heart, I might have walked into that day believing I had lost the person I worked hardest to protect. Instead, I walked forward knowing that our relationship had become stronger because we faced something difficult together. When I arrived at the ceremony, I saw Emily standing there with a smile on her face. For a moment, I remembered all the years when she was the one I was guiding through life. Now she was standing beside me, supporting me through my own new beginning. That moment meant more to me than I could explain. After the ceremony, Emily hugged me and whispered, "I am happy for you, Dad." Those simple words carried so much meaning because I knew how much courage it took for her to say them. She was not pretending that change was easy. She was choosing to accept it because she understood that love does not disappear when life changes. Sarah and Emily continued building their relationship slowly. They did not try to force a connection that was not there. They allowed trust to grow naturally. They shared conversations, family dinners, and everyday moments that slowly created something new. I noticed that Emily began seeing Sarah differently. She no longer saw her as someone who was entering our family. She saw her as someone who cared about the people already in it. One evening, we were all sitting together at dinner when Emily laughed and said something that surprised me. "Dad, I think I was more worried about losing our old life than I was about losing you. I looked at her and smiled because that was the truth we had both needed to understand. Change is difficult because it asks us to let go of something familiar. But letting go of one version of life does not mean losing everything we love. Sometimes it means making room for something new. As the months passed, I noticed another change in myself. For years, I had believed that being a good father meant always putting myself last. But Emily helped me understand something important. Children do not only learn from what parents give up, they also learn from seeing their parents live with courage, hope, and happiness. I wanted Emily to know that caring for myself did not mean caring about her less. It meant showing her that everyone deserves a chance to experience love and companionship. Looking back, I realized the hardest conversation of my life became one of the most valuable. If Emily had never spoken those painful words, we might never have talked about the fears we both carried. We might have continued assuming we understood each other when we really needed to communicate more. Our family changed, but it did not break. It grew. And as I watched Emily and Sarah laugh together, I understood that the thing I feared most was never actually happening. I was not losing my daughter. I was watching her become someone who could love me enough to let me be happy. When I look back on the years that brought me to this moment, I realized the most important lesson was not about finding love again. It was about understanding that love has many forms, and one kind of love does not have to replace another. For 24 years, I believe my greatest responsibility was protecting Emily. I believed that as long as she was happy, I had done my job as a father. But I learned something I never expected. A parent does not stop being a parent when a child grows up. The relationship simply changes. It becomes less about holding their hand through every step and more about walking beside them as equals. Emily and I went through a difficult season together. There was a time when I thought her fear might create a distance between us that we could never repair. I wondered if the daughter I had spent my life protecting would always see my happiness as something that took away from hers. But I was wrong. Emily did not want to lose me. She wanted reassurance that she still had a place in my life. Once we understood that, everything began to change. Months after the wedding, our family settled into a new rhythm. It was not the same life we had before, and honestly, I was grateful for that. The old version of our family was built around survival. It was built around a father and daughter facing the world together because we had no other choice. The new version was built around something different. It was built around choice, trust, and the understanding that love can expand. Emily began creating her own traditions with Sarah. They would sometimes meet for coffee, share recipes, or talk about everyday things. Watching that happen reminded me that relationships do not have to be forced. The strongest connections often grow slowly, through small moments of kindness and understanding. One afternoon, Emily and I sat together on my porch, the same place where we had shared countless conversations over the years. She looked around and smiled. "Do you remember when it was just the two of us?" she asked. I smiled too. "I remember everything." She nodded. "I used to think those years were the only version of our family that mattered." I understood what she meant. Those years shaped us. They were special because they represented everything we overcame together. But I told her something I had learned. The best memories do not disappear just because new ones are created. Emily smiled and said, "I think I finally understand that." That sentence meant more to me than she knew. Because for a long time, I worried that my daughter would always see my happiness as something that came after her. But she finally understood that she was the reason I knew how to love deeply in the first place. She was the reason I became the person I was. Sarah and Emily were never meant to compete for a place in my heart. They represented different kinds of love, and both were important. Looking back, I am thankful that Emily said what she said, even though it hurt at the time. Those words forced us to have conversations we might have avoided forever. They showed us where our fears were hiding. They reminded us that even the strongest families need honesty. Life does not stay the same. Children grow. Parents change. New people enter our lives. But change does not mean losing what matters. It means learning how to carry those important relationships into a new chapter. Today, when I think about that difficult moment with Emily, I do not remember the fear I felt. I remember the love behind it. I remember a daughter who was afraid of losing her father. I remember a father who needed to understand that protecting his child also meant showing her how to live fully. And most importantly, I remember that family is not defined by choosing one person over another. A family grows when people learn how to make room for more love. After 24 years of being a single father, I finally understood something I wish I had known from the beginning. The greatest gift a parent can give a child is not a life without change. It is the confidence to know that love will remain, even when everything around them changes.